economics, as we define, is fundamentally flawed in today's world. It was very successful. We're not saying that there's a north-south divide, even if there may be. We're not saying the West is exploited and the East is not, and the South is exploited, etc., etc. What we're saying is the definition of economics itself is contradictory to actually saving ecology. So unless you change this whole definition, unless you value it differently, it is impossible to actually change this paradigm. We will be at the next Club of Rome and many other Club of Romes, and we'll be still defining it. We can't change it. It's easy to talk about it. It's difficult to get about it. But the reality is the definition of economics is, unless, if every country, and the Economist magazine, when we pick up, say, what is the definition of growth? India, 8%. 5 African countries, 9%. 10 South American countries, 20%. How foreign exchange, meaning plus plus. Dollar ratio plus plus. Unless it's defined that way, there's no other way of actually judging whether you're doing well. In fact, going to a family value, is my son doing well, at least from an Indian paradigm? Yes, he's doing well, he stays in America, he's got 2 cars, he has 5 holidays. So we are actually following this whole Western and American dream very successfully. So the whole of China and the whole of India, if it had, everybody had cars, and if everybody had the same dream as America and Europe, we would need 7 planets to fulfill it. So therefore it goes back to my small definition of the Club of Rome, saying that it's about ecological management and it's about resource management. The definition of ecology, however, is a bit different, and that really impacts this whole question of falling land and soil degradation because you're doing more, better, brighter, faster, cheaper, and the dependence on this whole fossil fuel technology and not externalities. And to that extent, I think substantial ecological losses are taking place. So if you really did just an asset calculation, meaning your return on net assets, are they good? There are many companies here who are represented, meaning our own companies that we associated are actually talking about return on net assets. But when we talk, when we say, is ecology a net asset? Nobody wants to do it, because the fundamental first point, therefore, next slide, is that we need to understand that ecological depletion is not asset creation. Next slide. What we really need is ecological neutrality or positivity. What does that mean? We need to actually understand that economy plus ecology plus inclusive growth is actually looking at eco-valuations. So what is an eco-valuation? It's quite simple. You know, if you talk about, let's talk about the northern side. In the sea, if you take the fish in the sea doesn't have a value. But the fish served in the market has a value. The water, fresh water that's flowing in a river doesn't have a value. But when bottled or eaten or delivered for a street or service, has a value. How do we actually compromise? And how do we create a value where we leave the fish and the water neutral? I'm giving you very simplistic examples. When you go more complex, it is about biodiversity valuation. Do we have a value for a butterfly, an insect, a flower, meaning a moss, meaning a fungi? Is there any value for this biodiversity, and do we actually value it because we can't convert it, etc., etc.? So it leads us to actually trying to understand that the paradigm shift has to start with one thing, that every company and every country has to do an ecological valuation and a baseline. I mean, this is real work and this is the real world.
We are now looking to India for advice on how we move into the future. India now plays a critically important role for the world. And this meeting today, I see it therefore as extremely significant. And I therefore want to just spend that moment to congratulate those who have organized this, this meeting and the development of the chapter of the Club of Rome. I have started a School of Enterprise and the Environment. I'm going to add that word because it's absolutely crucial. We're working with governments around the world and with private sector companies on the transformations that we are now discussing. What is required in order to meet these massive challenges? And the challenges I'm talking about are all real and can be met, but there is a massive problem of inertia. And I just want to say that inertia underlies everything we're trying to fight against. Whether it is social and behavioral inertia, we don't want to change our ways, or whether it's infrastructure inertia, inertia built into the way we built our cities, the way we build our power trains, etc. We have to overcome inertia. That requires a massive amount of effort from those of us who are able to deliver because of our positions in society. We no longer can afford to make mistakes of that kind, right? Because, and we have already been discussing this, the total population of the world we have to prepare for in the very near future is 9.5 billion. The world is already overpopulated. There is nowhere for us to move. This single planet of ours is our home, as so beautifully represented in that film we saw a short while ago. So we have to manage our affairs much more cleverly than we have in the past. So far, there is very little evidence of our managing to do that. We have little time to change. I just want to say the population, that 9.5 billion, is, for the purposes of my discussion, the driver. Of course we want to see female education, female empowerment, access to contraceptives to manage the population growth. Of course we do. But we still have to face 9.5 billion people. And if we believe the GDP growth syndrome, then we're going to have exponential growth sitting on top of this sublinear population growth. So the driver for challenge is 9.5 billion people on the planet. If we were still only 1 billion, as we were in 1870, these problems would not be there.
We are in a crisis situation, there's no doubt about that. There are multiple crises. The previous speaker spoke at some length about the environment. I think in the short time that I have, I can't do anything more than just flag what I consider to be the major problems that humanity is facing today as we now transit into a global society willy-nilly. Whether we like it or not, science and technology have impelled us to move into a global society. Our minds are still stuck in pre-global grooves, and therefore the problem is how we catch up, how our consciousness is able to cope with what is an entirely new dimension of human history.
And that's one of those famous pictures that inspired me to say, the world is just not green, the world is blue. And I was actually very intrigued by seeing that the blue sponsor is higher than the green sponsor. And we have this incredible biodiversity that surrounds us and inspires us. And that biodiversity that should motivate us to really go beyond what we know. And let me just give you a snapshot of the blue economy versus the green. I've been very active in that green economy for 30 years, but it's expensive, it requires subsidies, and it imposes taxes. We don't have governments who can afford it anymore. That blue economy must be innovative, competitive, and generate jobs with a return on investment. If you don't generate the jobs, your technology must be sacked. It cannot be substitutive effects. And when I say it's innovative, it's the innovative business model, not just the innovative technology. And the green economy was too much about protecting what we have, complying with the new laws, and we have to recognize so much in the green economy is divisive. You're for or against. And we have to go beyond that. We have to see the capacity to regenerate, be entrepreneurial, and that basically means take risks. Take risks because you believe that you can do better. And choose the best because you believe in it, not because science tells you.
I've come a long way to tell you this story, and it's been reasonably painful on the way. So do stay, don't run away. It'll be worth it. Now, I am often described as an explorer, but I'm not. And the last true great exploration left on Earth is to survive on Earth. And the heroes and heroines of that journey are you. So I think what we've learned today is that we are on a huge challenge. And I've come to tell you a quick story about what's possible to achieve together. And it's not my story. It's actually our story. But the basis of the story is about personal leadership. If each of us are leading ourselves as best we can, people will listen to us. If we are not, then they won't. I also ask you, as you listen to this story, to imagine, I know you'd like to, but just imagine that you are 17 years of age again. Now, ladies and gentlemen, one word that was missed out in my introduction, I actually am the first person in history stupid enough to have walked to both bloody poles. You've got to be stupid. 1,600 kilometres on foot to the south, 1,400 kilometres on foot to the north. And if you are that person, and I am.
Now, this agenda is not going to be taken forward through Copenhagen and world conferences. I am of the strong belief that this has to be an agenda that has to be localized. It has to be the individual on the ground who is living an unsustainable life that needs to be convinced and persuaded to lead a sustainable life. And that has to come from policy makers at all levels, right from the national dispensation to the local dispensation. Now, teachers and priests can talk about values and espouse the cause of values, but it's very hazardous for politicians to talk about values, because nobody believes politicians now. So what we need to do is to ensure that politicians understand that in economic planning they must ensure an index of sustainability in every project that is taken forward. And that must be consistent throughout the planning process, both at the national level, the state level, and the local level. That will be the analytical part of it, because you will be able to explain to the world how important it is for a sustainable global community. But I think that if you want to win this war, it has to be won in the classroom. It has to be won in the schools. It has to be won in the curriculum that we create for children as they absorb values through their nascent minds. And unless you're able to do that, you'll not have a generation that thinks sustainably. At the moment, we have generations who don't think sustainably because they have no access to the information that is necessary for them to think sustainably. And that can only happen as children grow up. And I don't think there is a global agenda on the education front to be able to help children think sustainably. And that's really, I think, the heart of the matter. If future generations grow up thinking sustainably, half your battle is won, and then they will grow up to be part of the political system who will also start thinking sustainably. This is not going to happen in 1 year, but I think it's time to start now. And the last point that I wish to make is that the communication and information technology revolution now allows us to reach this message to every child and every individual in the world. And therefore, we should use the information and communication technology and the revolution that is taking place to actually ensure that this message is at the doorstep of every citizen of the world. And so I think what we need is a global strategy around these issues, rather than harking back either on the Upanishads or on philosophy of the Western world.